How we mission. We've talked about having a welcoming environment and why we mission, and now we've come to the how. Here's another story of someone's life transformed by God. Mandy was a mum of 2 young boys and came to our young mothers outreach group, Chatterbox. It was at church and she was looking for help. There was morning tea, child minding, and a speaker talking about relationships. In one of the talks, a speaker had us write down the one thing we wish we could change about our husbands, and then he read them out without our names. My own husband didn't pick up his socks and undies, and there were similar sins read out. But then on the list was a standout, and that was from Mandy. Mandy wished her husband would stop urinating on their mattress from his drunken sprees, and they even had to throw the mattress out, it was so squalid. After the talk, I found her sunken on the floor in the toilets, drowning in a flood of tears. The comparison of her husband to others had hit her like a Mack truck. No longer could she deceive herself into thinking that hers was a normal marriage. The light had come on, and for the first time she faced the grim reality. I sat on that cold tile floor with her, but it felt like a deep, dark hole of despair. Over the coming months, a few of us reached out to her. She struggled with her 2 children and abusive husband. She'd been contemplating suicide as a way out, but then one lady spontaneously gave her a box of groceries. She was so overwhelmed with the love that she burst into tears. That somebody would give without expecting anything in return just blew her away. She was invited to a beginner's faith course and ended up giving her life to God within that year. In Mandy's story, there were many people involved so that she could be in a position to meet her Creator. The speaker, the organiser of the event, the servant-hearted morning tea makers, the childminders, the Christian mums who came alongside and supported her, the friend who offered a course that would deepen her faith. Each of these people played their part in cohesion to demonstrate the love of God. But compared to what God does, we really are playing such a small part. We're just planting the seed and watering it. We aren't making the plant grow. God does that. Paul says in Corinthians 3, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants or waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. When a woman is pregnant, she's not putting the arms, legs, brains on the baby. That's God's job. What she's doing though is feeding and watering it. Her responsibility is so small compared to God's. However, to make that baby in the first place, they need to have planted a seed. Otherwise, they're just making love. Sometimes I feel in ministry we are watering and nurturing, but we haven't actually planted the seed for God to grow anything. We're really good at making love, but for new growth and new life, we need to be able to plant a seed for that. What is a seed? I hear you ask. A seed is a challenge, a question, a scripture verse to ponder on, something sent from heaven that will stir the heart and mind to movement. Bear in mind that when the seed is first planted, nothing is really seen for a while. It takes some time for that little sucker to germinate and sprout, for us to see something that is changing, that is transforming. If we provide the right environment and plant seeds, there will be growth. There is no question about that. So if there's no growth in your ministry, take some time now to consider what could be the issue. Do you have warm smiles and hearts welcoming your community? Are you non-critical of parenting styles or lack of that are different from yours? Do you stress over the small stuff? Like when mum forgets their roster duty, or children who imitate Hansel and Gretel and leave a trail of crumbs everywhere they go? Being gracious in this moment and more difficult moments shines your love for them and consequently God's love. Do you have a course that can deepen people's faith? Have you asked people to it? Do you know the faith or lack of those coming to your group? I've touched on teamwork in Mandy's story, and while this is important, what's also important is to have evangelists in your team. But they can be elusive. How can we find them? Look around for the person in your church who can sell ice to Eskimos or sand to desert dwellers. Those people who grab the bargain in a 60% off sale and absolutely need to tell you about it. The ones that can't keep their party to a minimum because they don't want anyone else to miss out. I think those people are your evangelists. They just might not know it yet. Hey, it could even be you. I know that was my story. I would pray for an evangelist to come, and in the end, I was the answer to the prayer. God's funny like that, isn't he? So now you've realised you need a team and an evangelist, I'd love you to consider the power of questions. Once you've had a great chat with a parent at Kids Club and she's let you know that life's rough at the moment, her husband may be off work, the kids are sick and she's suffering with anxiety, what do you say and what do you do? You could offer to cook a meal, send her an encouragement note or text throughout the week. This is great to give love in this form because you are showing that you care. However, another deeper level of love is giving her an opportunity to meet the source of your love, Jesus. It's really simple, and I'm going to show you how. It's as easy as asking a question. By the way, did you know that by asking questions, you are actually taking the lead in the conversation, even though you're only doing a little bit of the talking? There's a quest in the questions. It's an acronym that stands for Quickly Understand Everyone's Spiritual Temperature. And there are 3 types of questions. They get progressively deeper. They have the acronym SOS. Usually it stands for Save Our Souls, but today it stands for S, situational questions. That's the boring bit. Just like in a sandwich, you need to go through the crust to get to the filling. It's the same in conversations. We need to start generic and then hone into the good bit later in the conversation. Examples, sentences that start with what, who and where are all good starting points and essential to beginning to know people. The second one is opportunity questions. They probe a little deeper once trust is established. For example, sentences starting with why and how. How did it make you feel? Why did you do that? The third one is spiritual questions. Do you have a faith? What's your experience of spiritual matters? When's the right time to introduce Jesus into the conversation? It can be awkward to take a leap of faith and ask those questions I mentioned in the last video, but what if you don't? I know one story of a Playtime leader who had a beautiful community full of love and grace. One of her regular mums then left and came to our Playtime. At our Playtime, we were more intentional about mission and asked her questions about faith. We also asked her whether she'd like to attend a group where she could find out more about God. She attended this course and began her journey with Jesus shortly after. But when she ran into her old Playtime leader, she said to her, "Why didn't you ever tell me about Jesus?" Imagine how that leader felt. We can't be held accountable for someone rejecting God, but if we never ask those questions, we will never know what God can do with our faith and obedience to Him. So whatever ministry you build, whether it's a kids club, Playtime or music group, it's fairly easy to have many community families coming into the church, and most times they even pay to do so. What a great opportunity to share our heart for Jesus. In the kids clubs, the message is embedded in clever and creative ways so they understand the message of Jesus, which is awesome. But what about the adults? Are they floating around your building in drop-off and pick-up times? Is there a space you could intentionally create so that your church families can engage with them? A space with lounges, tables, chairs and good coffee? And what about your playgroup? Are you having God conversations with the community? Is there someone in your church that can run an alpha group? It's the right time when you're listening to God. Once our church family have loved the community, their hearts will be open and prepared for the seed of God. Kind of like the farmer who has tilled the soil ready for the seed to be planted. Acts of love and grace are softening a person's heart, ready for the message of Jesus. We've got 2 ears, one for listening to the person and the other one is to hear God. Once we've had a conversation and we've had a heartfelt connection, now it's the time to ask them a spiritual question. That's the last S in the SOS acronym. This is the seed of God we talked about from 1 Corinthians 3. Sometimes the heart will not be ready to hear. That's okay. Pray for them. Sometimes they will really enjoy the conversation. Over time, that seed will start to germinate and grow. With a plant, you can't tell what's happening under the surface, and this is the same for people. If I find the other person not comfortable with the turn of conversation towards spiritual matters, then I would change the subject back to something more comfortable for them. I call this a good dismount. That way, when they see you again, they don't remember the awkwardness so much. It's just that you were sensitive enough to hear their heart. You know how it's hard at first to reverse park into a car space? But after you get practice, there's no car park too tight a spot for you. And it can be like this in a spiritual conversation. Having the ability to extract yourself out of them with ease makes you enter them more and more. And you never know, one day you may find your friend who was objecting about faith matters wanting to know more and turning up to events that you never thought possible. That's the power of God. With Him, it is mission possible. It's like riding a roller coaster. Your adrenaline is rushing. Anticipation is high as you wait in the queue. Fear and fun mixed together. It takes guts to get in that carriage, and you may need a friend or two to encourage you along the way. And then on the ride, there were some twists and turns you weren't expecting. You got tossed and jostled. Verbal jousting in that courageous conversation kept you alert and alive. But when that ride had finished and you survived, your friendship grew deeper, your friend left one step closer to Jesus, and your faith grew stronger and God was glorified. And if you listen carefully, you can hear Him saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant."